Ann Ford is the executive director of the Illinois Network of Centers for Independent Living since 1999. Prior to that, she was executive director of the DuPage Center for Independent Living for 9 years and the Central Illinois Center for Independent Living for 3 years. She represents Centers for Independent Living at the state capitol and coordinates statewide advocacy efforts involving all of the centers. There's 22, I believe. She provides technical assistance and training to center boards and staffs on independent living philosophy, board roles and responsibilities in management. She also coordinates and provides training on disability awareness and sensitivity. Ms. Ford currently serves on the Social Services Advisory Council, a group to the Secretary of Human Services, and on the Illinois Department of Aging Long-Term Care Council. She's previously served on the boards of the statewide Independent Living Council of Illinois, the Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities in Illinois, the National Council on Independent Living, and the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. In March of 2008, she won an award, the PATH Award, which stands for People Are Today's Heroes. It's an award of the governor at that time, as presented annually to community leaders during Women's History Month. In 1995, she was also the first recipient of INCIL's Edward V. Roberts Excellence in Independent Living Award, and in 1997, she was awarded the Justin Dart Distinguished Citizen Award by the Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities in Illinois. Ann's disability is the result of having polio as a child. Her experience in a society not user-friendly or accepting of people with disabilities fuels her passion for advocacy to bring about equal opportunity and equal participation for all people in our society. She was active in the efforts to develop the Americans with Disability Act and get it passed. Just an amazing advocate here we have, and remains active to ensure its full implementation. She considers the ADA the landmark accomplishment of disability rights, not the end. Not the end of the struggle, and here is Ann Ford.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I wanted to get this mic just where it needed to be, so if you don't hear me, let me know. It is certainly my pleasure to be here. And I don't even know where to go after the first speaker. I was enthralled, I have to say, and highly informed from that presentation. So it probably won't surprise you that I'm going to talk some about independent living, since that seems to be a theme through my life, and what that philosophy is, and how that ties into involvement in the community and a partnership with all parts of our community, including particularly libraries. Centers for Independent Living are relatively new in the grand scheme of social service organizations. We started in the 70s, and we look at ourselves as somewhat different from other, quote, providers for a couple of reasons. We do not consider ourselves service providers. We consider ourselves advocates and agents of change in our communities. And part of the reason is our centers grew out of a belief on the part of people with disabilities that the people who know the most about our disabilities, know the most about what we need are people who have disabilities, regardless of what academic letters may or may not follow their name. And we felt that there needed to be organizations that helped people empower themselves by understanding that it was their right and their responsibility to control their own lives and make their own decisions. And when we talk about being independent, we don't mean that we do everything for ourselves, because we don't, most of us. And disability takes all different forms and sizes and shapes. But there are many of us who, without the assistance of somebody else or some program, would not be able to make it through a day. So we are not talking about being independent, meaning we do everything or we don't need anybody. Actually, I know an awful lot of people, and I don't think there's anybody who doesn't need anybody to help them in one way or another. When we talk about being independent, we talk about being in control of your own life. And I know people, some of the great leaders in our movement, a couple of the people whose names are on the awards I was lucky enough to win, are people who could physically do almost nothing for themselves. So they relied pretty totally on the assistance of other people to do what they did. But they were the ones in charge. And so we don't talk about caretakers, we talk about personal assistants. We don't talk about somebody coming to our house to take care of us. We talk about somebody coming to assist us to do those things we can't do. It's a different philosophy for some people. It is aiming to replace the sympathy that's always been there if you're different and you need assistance. It's to take away what has always been there for people with disabilities, which is an assumption that we aren't just part of our daily society, and we are. I think an awful lot of the things that we heard Marty talk about earlier fit exactly into what Centers for Independent Living do, because part of our purpose is to do those things both in the way of advocacy and in the way of services to people that allow people with disabilities to fully participate in their communities. And that means everything. That means going to school where they want to go to school, going to church where they want to go to church, socializing where they want to socialize, having a job, being able to support themselves. And part of the work that we do is to try to eliminate the barriers that prevent people right now from being able to do that. We don't, quote, specialize in any kind of disability. Our movement that was started, again, back in the 70s, was started originally by people with physical disabilities, because at that time, they were the ones who were really feeling the effects of living in the segregated society, of not being able to pursue an education because of the barriers that might exist, of not being included in their communities. And so Centers for Independent Living started as sort of a self-help kind of organization. As this movement grew, it eventually, through a lot of advocacy efforts, became a movement that was defined in law. In what used to be the Rehabilitation Act, there was a whole title added that defined independent living centers and laid out certain standards that they had to meet, certain practices that they had to follow. And one of the things that is required, both in federal and state law, of a Center for Independent Living is that it be governed and operated primarily by people with disabilities. So the boards of directors that are the governing bodies of Centers for Independent Living must always be at least 50% people with disabilities and not just one kind of disability. The same as with the staff. The staffs are required to be 50% people with disabilities. I was interested in a part of what Marty said this morning when she talked about the difference between coming somewhere in a wheelchair or walking in somewhere as a person with autism, because wherever I go, when I get there, there is no secret about the fact that I have a disability. I take it right there with me, and it's a little bit ahead of me even. So everybody knows that, and everybody understands that, and there are all different kinds of reactions, some of them good and some of them not good. But with a disability like autism, and others that are not so easily seen, it's a whole different situation. And in some cases, a whole different kind of stigma. I think that all disability still, unfortunately today, carries some kind of stigma and evokes all different kinds of reactions from people, ranging from sympathy and wanting to do something to help you, to fear and kind of backing away and not wanting to get too close, to those people who are more enlightened and accept whatever they encounter and keep their eyes open and their minds open and learn more about all of us. So it's a whole range, and I think that's one of the common denominators of those of us with very noticeable disabilities and those of us with what are sometimes called hidden disabilities. In a Center for Independent Living, our philosophy and our advocacy encompass every kind of disability. We don't set a difference, we don't prioritize, we don't do any of that. And we feel that the common bond that we all have is forms of discrimination that we have all faced. And our advocacy efforts are geared toward eliminating that discrimination and taking away those barriers. The physical barriers people are well acquainted with, and the physical barriers have been gradually reduced and reduced. I'm not going to say there aren't any, but there is such a difference. I think you could tell from what Suzanne read about me that I'm pretty old. So I've lived in this society long enough to remember a time when I couldn't get in 99% of the buildings in the community I lived in. Our terminology was different. There were those days when we were crippled, which is not a very nice word these days. And there were barriers everywhere. And so fast forward to today, when somebody whose disability is like mine has it so much easier. I live here in Springfield. I live actually less than 2 blocks away from here. And getting here, getting to the Capitol where I do a lot of work, getting to my office, which is another couple blocks away, when the weather permits, I don't have to do anything except push this little button and I go. And there was a time that wouldn't have happened, but when you walk down the street and you see those curb cuts and you come to a building like this and you see a level entrance and doors that are easy to open. Those are all things that came about through our efforts to tear down barriers. And as hard as we thought it was back in those days, I have to say now that I think that was the easy part, because now the barriers that we need to tackle are much harder. It's pretty easy to pass a law that says there have to be curb cuts everywhere. It's not so easy to pass a law that says everybody has to accept everybody else, regardless of the differences. We refer to those as attitudinal barriers, and those are the barriers that are probably going to be the very hardest to get rid of, that are probably going to take the very longest, and it almost has to be done on a person-by-person basis. All of us, whatever our backgrounds are, wherever we come from, grew up with certain influences and certain beliefs and certain attitudes, and those people who maybe have never been exposed to somebody who's different in any way may find it hard when they encounter somebody different to be that accepting, to say, well, why do they do this, or why do they use this thing, or why do they have a sign language interpreter, or why do they have a guide, on and on and on and on. And so we step back a little bit, and we don't always just stop to think, this is just another person, and they're probably a lot more like me than they are different from me. But if we don't take the time to let our minds open and to get acquainted, we don't always know that. So that is one of the big things that we have worked on forever in independent living. Obviously, all those years ago when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, that was a major accomplishment that we took great pride in. That was 25 years ago, and there still are areas where it's not lived up to its potential yet. One of those areas is employment. It says that you cannot discriminate against somebody in hiring. You can't discriminate against somebody in interviewing. And so it changes a lot of things that used to be common practice. As a very young person, I remember going on job interviews that my vocational rehabilitation counselor sent me on into places that were nowhere near accessible. At that time, I walked on crutches and I would drag myself up a flight of stairs only to have a potential employer look right at me and say, I couldn't hire you because you're crippled. So that part of the ADA is wonderful. They can't say that anymore. They may think that. They can't say it unless they want to go to court with me. So, that's one big thing. The bigger barrier is having potential employers be open enough to really do an interview like they do with everybody else, give you the opportunity to persuade them that you're the person for that job, and tell them why, and tell them what you will do with that job. And it should have nothing to do with your disability, whatever the job is. If you have gone to school and gotten the necessary credentials for a certain job, you should be given the opportunity to use that education and to build your skills in that kind of job, just the same as somebody who's not disabled. And I think we don't always realize that. And I think that's true pretty much in all of society. People look at us like, well, we're kind of a burden, and now they have to do this and that. But I remember when the ADA was first passed, and there was so much talk about the cost that was going to be there for businesses, and we were just going to put people out of business. And I had an experience one time, this is like within the first year after it was passed. And at that time, I lived up north in DuPage County, and I still walked with my crutches, and I drove my car. And I had gone to a grocery store one day after work, and part of my disability as it progresses is pretty serious fatigue. So, you know, it's the end of the workday and I'd be tired, and I'd have my little list with maybe 3 things I needed to pick up, and I was gonna go right in and get those and leave the store. So I walked in this grocery store, and the manager, I would shop there all the time, it was a big chain, saw me and he came over and he said, would you like to try this new cart we got as a service for people with disabilities? And it was bigger than what I drive now, but similar. And he said, it might make it easier for you. And I said, well, sure, I'll try. So I get in that cart and I push the button and it goes. And I went through the store and I went up and down every aisle in the store. I had no idea they sold all that stuff in grocery stores. I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was in that store at least an hour and a half. I had the basket filled. I'm sure I got my 3 things on my list, but I got 25 or 30 other things, and now I knew I could do this. And I thought when I went home, I probably spent enough here to help pay for this thing when I used it. And I told everybody I knew. I mean, I had a lot of other friends who had disabilities, and it was difficult to get around. And I would say, well, go to this store, they've got this card, and it's wonderful. So that proved to me that we were not on the wrong track, and we were not about to put businesses out of business. We actually were going to probably add a great deal to the economy, and I haven't stopped that practice yet. I believe that that's one of the roles we play, is to add to the economy and help the economy grow. And that's one of the reasons we want to work. We don't want to work just to give us something to do. You know, we want to earn a living. We want to be able to pay our own way, and we want to be able to shop and go up and down aisles and find all kinds of treasures. So I think that's, to me, that was an eye-opener of an aspect of what we were fighting for that we hadn't looked at before. And that is by being part of our community, participating in our community, we also added to the economy of our community in a way that everybody else does. So I think about that a lot, you know, when I hear what kind of burden we might be, because I'm thinking, no, I give you a lot of my money, I'm not a burden. So that's, you know, that was one of the things that I thought was very important. I think getting to being part of our community, one of the things that Centers for Independent Living do is serve as a place in the community that people who need any kind of information related to disability can go to. And that doesn't mean we know everything. I did not come here as an expert on autism, because I'm not. I came here as an expert on disability and on what role a center can play. And I know from the days that I directed Centers for Independent Living that one of our mandated services is information and referral. And the calls that we would get would often be from people with disabilities, and we were able either to have them come in and work with one of our staff on issues, or get them referred to the right place. But many, many more calls were from places in the community that needed a source of information about disability. And if we didn't have that information, part of our role is to get them connected with where they can find that information and to be a partner to them. The center that I was with in DuPage County had developed a disability awareness presentation that we did in many, many libraries. I think there are, I believe it's 37 municipalities in DuPage County, and I think we probably did presentations at least 25 of them, just to, again, go through, first of all, physical access, but also attitudinal access, and talking about, you know, it isn't anything about a disability when somebody comes into your library. It's about them wanting to use the library the same way that everybody else does. And I think that's a key thing. That was another thing that stood out to me in Marty's presentation this morning. You know, nobody is coming in looking for you to do anything about their disability. They are looking to use your library the way we all should be using your libraries, to gain information, to find things we like to read, to learn about subjects that are important to us. And I think that being involved in the community is an important thing for libraries to do. I think looking at organizations like Centers for Independent Living as a partner that can help you do that is a very important thing. I think the same thing with other providers. Because we are not disability specific, we don't do anything of a medical nature, and we don't do any single disability issues. We have to be connected to those other providers that do that, so that if there is information you need about a specific disability, we should be able to get you connected to the right place for that particular kind of information. That's one of the roles. And we should be the place where people with all kinds of disabilities feel welcome and feel that they can participate in what we're doing, and particularly learning about advocacy and self-advocacy. Because that's very important. As long as there continues to be a struggle for equal rights for people, people have to know the rights they do have to advocate for themselves. And we do a great deal of that. We teach people the legislative process. We inform people about where they should be going. If they have issues, who's the best person to talk to? If they need to contact their own legislators, how they do that. And we push that a lot, because that's a part of becoming really empowered, is being in your community and knowing who to go to get a resolution to a problem that maybe is a barrier in your life. So I think those are some of the key, very important things that we do in terms of being interconnected in our communities. Most of our centers are very involved in their chambers, so that they, again, are able to carry that message of full integration for people with disabilities. Sometimes people in a chamber for commerce aren't necessarily looking for somebody in a wheelchair to be at their monthly meeting. But if that person in that wheelchair has a business in town, that's where they should be. So we do that. We make those connections with a lot of those kinds of organizations, just about any organization in the community, as well as other social service providers. Things seem to be changing rapidly in the whole area of disability services and other social services. It is very important for us to be kept fully aware of the changes in technology, the new things. I mean, we heard Marty talk a lot about iPads and how useful they are, and we have found that with almost all disabilities. you know, people who are nonverbal maybe because of cerebral palsy or some other disability. I do a presentation a couple times a year to medical students, and one of the other people on my team is a man with cerebral palsy who worked for years and years and years for the state and is now retired. But the impact on his speech was that he is not able to speak in a way that you can communicate. And I watched him over the years go through different devices, and then he got an iPad, and it was just amazing how he could communicate with that iPad, and what an easier thing it seemed to be than the other devices. So, you know, technology is creating a whole new world for people with disabilities. People who are deaf, it's incredible how they've embraced technology and how they use it and how they communicate. And I have often said, if there is something that I want to be sure everybody knows about, first person I'm going to tell is a deaf person, because it's out there then. 3 minutes later, every deaf person in the state knows it. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think we all should make use of that. But it has opened so many doors, and it has allowed people to be able to participate at a much higher level than they could before. Not that we don't still need things like interpreters and devices that assist people, but technology has made it much, much easier and a much better opportunity for just about everybody, I think, to be part of their community and pursue what it is they're trying to pursue. I think also I'm stealing a lot of what Marty talked about, because I was absolutely blown away by her presentation. So, but when she talked about employment opportunities for people with autism in libraries, you know, that's the kind of thing that I think we don't always think about, because again, we get caught up in the what ifs and what's this behavior and what's that behavior. But the reality is that oftentimes people who might have a couple behaviors you're not sure about will have traits that will make them extremely valuable to you as employees. Her example of you know, stocking the shelves and getting the books back in place, and things that some people, you know, it might be a job and I'll put this here and I'll put this here. But if you get somebody who, by nature of something that we want to call a disability, is so focused on having things just right and in just the right place, what better trait could you ask for? And I think there are a lot of opportunities to involve people in your library, either on a volunteer basis or as employees, which again, I think is an important thing. And I tend to ramble on just an awful lot. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you would like me to talk about? Quiet. Okay. I also don't see very well. Yes.
I was lucky enough, I guess I should say, to be temporarily disabled with my new knee, Marcia, in case you'd like to meet her. And I did not realize until I needed the assistance that I could go to the Center for Independent Living, and that's where I got my walker. And those kinds of outreach opportunities are a really good opportunity to share with everybody else in your communities, and the fact that I learned so much just by going to the center, and now I'm much more aware of it, so I appreciate that service.
Thank you. It's good to know.
I want to thank you for everything you said and for everything you've done for people with disabilities. It means a lot to me. Could you comment a little bit on person-first language and what you think about that and the development of it? whether you use it, whether you encourage people to use it, whether you think it's kind of politically correct or not necessary, or
Sure. I personally try to use it, and again, I think part of that relates to my own personal history and to some of the things throughout the years that have been said that were not only insulting but hurtful. And so, Marty referred to it being a little controversial among people with autism. I think it is among the whole disability community. There are some people who are absolutely adamant and they will jump on you if you say something the wrong way. I personally don't believe in that. I mean, I would have a comment or two if somebody referred to somebody as crippled, which is a very old term, and handicapped isn't so great. But, within our own community and even with some of the people that I regard as our leaders, there are people who will say, you must only say person with a disability. And there are other people who will say, I'm fine if you say disabled people. And I think we don't want that to be a deciding factor. I feel it is more acknowledging of your personhood if you do use person first language. But I think that needs to be followed up then by your action and your attitude about that person. And I'm not going to mind at all if you call me a disabled person, but you're very open to getting to know me and not judging me based on what I drive around. But that, again, that's my opinion, and you will find other people that won't. I think that there's a danger sometimes of pushing political correctness a little too far and making it so people are afraid to say anything at all. And that's the thing I would not like to see. I would not like to see anybody feel like they can't talk to a person with a disability because they're afraid that some term they use is going to offend them. Because again, even within our community, it's all over the place. So I think be respectful, I mean, we heard Marty talk about some of the awful things that have been said through the years about people with autism, and the same is true about people with other disabilities. And there are some words that are absolutely taboo. Recently, there's even been legislation about not using the word retarded, because it first of all, the connotation just automatically places that individual in a light that you're going to look at them differently. And the same is true with crippled. You don't hear that word much anymore. Every now and then I say it if I'm really mad at somebody, but it's not a word that's used too much in common conversation. But I think we just need to be aware that there needs to be an element of respect, and the words may not always come out the same, but it's good to know those things you should not say, and it's good to really not say things that might be considered derogatory. So it's kind of a fine line, and I think that any person might spin it a little bit differently. I don't know if that helped answer your question.
Very much.
Any other questions that anybody has?
Thank you so much for all of the things you just talked about. That last comment made me think about a lot of things, but I am in academia, and I had the fortune recently to get to attend a faculty workshop where a lot of the conversation was about universal design. And you've been part of this movement for such a long time, and I had a number of thoughts, but mostly we were talking about how can teachers in a university context teach better, teach more accessibly, teach to the broadest possible range of people by using things that everybody can access well. But I wondered what you thought about that movement or that idea and how relevant you see it might be or not be to us here today and in your own work. I'd be curious.
In terms of teaching?
Well, I'm really thinking about the term and the concept of universal design.
Okay.
Is that something that you see as the way forward, or do you see it having some limitations? Maybe it's a little bit like the previous question.
Well, and I think that there can be some limitations. I'm not the total expert on universal design, and a lot of times what we need to look at is there accessibility to something, whether it's a service, whether it's education, whatever it is. Does a person with a disability have equal access? And that might be different than universal design. I just recently, I'm participating in a project with a couple state agencies that, excuse me, that is looking at domestic violence and its application to people with disabilities, because it is a big factor in some people's lives. And one of the things that a subcommittee I chair is working on is looking at domestic violence providers and their facilities, and could somebody with a disability make use of their facility. If that thing happens at 10 o'clock at night and you've got to go somewhere, can you go to your local shelter and be accommodated? And so we are working on looking at facilities, actually going out and doing surveys, not to measure and say, is this doorway as wide as the ADA says it should be, or can somebody in a wheelchair get through this doorway? And again, I think there is a fine line. I think universal design as an ultimate goal is not a bad thing. I think that here and now, we don't want to discourage any facility, any place from being as accessible as it can. And maybe the time will come when you can take that next step. Maybe you get an opportunity to build a new facility and then universal design can kick in. So again, some of these things become very controversial because we want to say, this is the way it has to be and it can't be any other way. Again, as somebody with a disability who likes to be able to go where I want to go, I don't carry a tape measure. If I come in one of your libraries, I'm not going to be measuring your doorways. I'm going to be looking am I able to get in here? Am I able to find the books that I'm coming for? Am I able to get around? And is the attitude here one that welcomes me and says, if we need to move something, we'll move it. So, and I feel the same way in terms of education. It's important for us to know about things like universal design. It's important for us to know things like we might need to use something today, and maybe in the future it's going to be redesigned and made more perfect, but right now can we use it today? And so I think what I would be encouraging is, again, just to be very open in looking at how we accommodate people, what their needs are, just like we need to learn how to accommodate if there is a child or an adult with autism in our facility and they have a meltdown, how do we accommodate that? The same thing if there's a child or an adult in a wheelchair and maybe they're having a little trouble getting through the aisles or something, what can we do to make that usable right now while we look at what our plans are for ultimate total accessibility? I worry sometimes that we take these things and we say, this is how it must be right this minute, and that's an impossibility. I mean, I remember the battle for accessible transportation, and I remember being at a meeting easily 35 years ago with some transit people who said, you guys just need to realize you're never going to be able to ride buses. Because at that time, that's what it looked like. And step by step by step, it took the ADA, although some things happened before that. But we figured out, yeah, we can, and we do, and we go a lot of places on buses now. And I think the same thing is true when we look at design. It would be really a perfect world if everything were built to all those standards right now. But I think our first priority needs to be, we know that we're not going to tear down all these buildings we have right now, so what can we do to make them accessible and then move toward the next plan? Any other questions?
Hi, thank you for everything. I'd like to echo that. I appreciate you discussing how acceptable terminology has changed over the years. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts about the term disability? Sometimes you'll see occasional articles about changing that word to something such as alternate abilities or empowered. I work with, as Section 504 coordinator for a college, I work with a lot of students with disabilities, and they don't like the term disability. And sometimes they even might not seek services they'd be eligible for because they just don't like that label.
Oh, wow. Well, again, it's something that almost comes down to personal preference. I mean, to me, and again, my history goes way back to really ugly words. I have no problem with the term disability. Younger people might, and I'm not sure. I mean, when I went to school as an older adult, actually, for a few years, and I went to Illinois State University, and they had an Office of Disability Concern that magically helped you with all kinds of accessibility problems and things like that. They were amazing, and that term did not ever bother me. Now, I don't know with today's students, with younger people, if they might. I tend to look at some of the terms like differing abilities and so on. That's everybody. I mean, everybody in this room has different kinds of abilities, and everybody in this room has different things that they can't do. I don't think we could put a label on all those things. We all have differing abilities. And so, you know, again, a lot of it does come down to personal preference. I really would be disappointed to know that people wouldn't take advantage of services that might help them deal with some of the things on a college campus you have to deal with because of that word. And, you know, that might warrant a conversation with whoever makes those decisions to see what should be done about that. And again, some of it may also come down to what kind of disability you have, and if it is a very visible disability or a more hidden one, because one of the realities, and I think it has to do a lot with the whole attitude thing, is there are many people whose disabilities are not visible who choose not to disclose that they're disabled. And they do that, again, because there is stigma. There has always been stigma. I knew a woman once who worked in the same office I did. There were 3 people in the office. Myself, my boss who was a man in a wheelchair, and this woman. And she only worked there a year or so, and it just seemed to me that there was something bothering her almost all the time. And at the end, when she actually was resigning, she disclosed to me that she had epilepsy. And then she came in every day terrified that she was going to have a seizure, and in the process she might hurt me or my boss. And I said, why didn't you tell us when you came and tell us what we should do to help you if you have a seizure? And she said, well, this is something we just don't talk to people about. And I thought, what a horrible way to have to live. But and that was a long time ago. I believe today there still exist people whose disability is not at all visible, and they don't want to disclose that to people. They worry about the stigma, they worry about prejudice, they worry about how they're going to be treated. And that might be why they would hesitate to take advantage of something called disability services, because then it says, in our society, I've got something wrong with me. So that's a pretty difficult situation. And I don't know if having conversations with them would help, but I certainly would advise that.
I'm hoping you can talk about the role of the center and the network that you've built as the individual ages. And then also talk about the role of, Marty mentioned, a significant other or a loved one or a family as support. How do centers and the networks support those individuals, the individual as well as the people that support them throughout the lifespan? And then again, talk about the lifespan. Thank you.
Centers for Independent Living, again, part of what our mandates are. One is to practice what we call consumer control, which means that in our services, the individual with the disability is the one that we are working with and for. It is, when they come to us, first of all, we don't do anything medical, so we don't do medical assessments. We do an intake that is geared toward that person saying to us what their needs are, what they feel their needs are. And we go through a whole thing of a listing of the kinds of areas that we work in, the things that we might help them with, and let them identify what it is that they want to work on, where they want to set goals. They do set what we call independent living goals. When that person, there's a formality that involves developing your personal independent living plan and establishing some goals that you're going to work on. And once that is done, we have pretty strict confidentiality rules. So we would never discuss your issues or your situation with anybody unless you gave us a signed release that said, my mother or my relative is somebody that I want you to discuss my situation with. If the individual doesn't do that, we wouldn't be allowed. That doesn't mean that we don't try to provide support to other people in your life, but when it comes to really discussing issues related to what you are working with us on, we don't. We've had similar issues come up with maybe state VR counselors or people like that want to come in and talk about somebody. We don't discuss anybody without their permission, and usually prefer that they be included in that. And that, sometimes people have a little trouble understanding that, but it goes back to the whole belief that started this movement, that really we need to be the ones that make the decisions about our life. And if somebody else is going to be involved, we need to be able to say, yes, we want that person involved. And then they can be. But it pretty much has to be driven by the individual with a disability. I don't know, does that?
I'm thinking more like in a support capacity, so for instance, like a job coach, or someone's in transition, so I'm moving from high school to an employment setting, and the supports are changing, and the individual is able to transition because they're seeing very clearly what they want in front of them. However, the nature of the support structure, how do you kind of pave that road forward?
Because it'll change. I mean, I know that you reach certain ages and all your services change, but we would be working with that person to kind of talk about this is what would change, and these are the things we can look at. I mean, I think one of the things that's very important is to be aware of what's available. So if you're going to age out of a certain service, what else might be there? And with something like job coaches, I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be about that. But I think certainly if circumstances were such that that person was not going to be able to have that job coach, it would be the responsibility of the center to know and understand what we could look at that might fill that position and continue to give that person support.
For time. Oh, see, there's the stop sign.
I have really very bad vision, so
Are you going to be here for that?
I have to leave. I'm so sorry, but we've got calamities at my office.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I am
I'm
too.
so glad you came. I think everybody got a lot out of everything you shared. And this is your ceremonial blue book.
Okay. Thank you all very much.